by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down, yeah, we read.
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. I have news from the bongo drums. And the bongo drums are beating out a very interesting tune that I thought I would share with you if Aurora will allow me to do so. Well, I am getting some very interesting news that as we are speaking, well, as I am taping, to be more accurate, the king and one or two of their trusted advisors are actually having a crisis meeting about the whole of the, well, it is a crisis. I do not think it is necessarily quite the crisis that some of the mainstream media are making it out to be, but certainly the Epstein Andrew business is extremely distressing to people on both sides of the Atlantic as well as in the family. And I understand that the likely course to be recommended to Andrew is that he go into exile. I think that actually is a very sensible course of action. The Duke of Windsor immediately left this country and went into exile after he renounced the throne. And I mean, irrespective of whether Andrew claims to be basically innocent of the things that he has been really found guilty of in the court of public opinion and mainstream media, or not, is beside the point at this stage. The fact of the matter is that any way you cut it, Andrew's presence in this country is now divisive. It is conducive to encouraging the mainstream media to continue with their really hounding of him. And whether he regards it and other people regard it as right or wrong, the reality is he should do what King Juan Carlos of Spain did. He immediately left Spain and he, by and large, only appears back in Spain very seldom and for very specific things. I think Andrew should do the same. I think Andrew should actually go into exile in the Middle East. He will find that life there is far more congenial because he will be in monarchies which are very old-fashioned, and if they are not absolute monarchies, they are certainly almost feudal monarchies. While the British monarchy is very much a monarchy of or under sufferance as a result of the politicians, the scrutiny, the inspection, and the ethos of the age, because the Middle East is far less egalitarian and far more traditionally hierarchical than we in the West are. They also have respect for traditional values that we have contempt for. So Andrew will be far more comfortable living in the Middle East then he can come and go privately and discreetly as he pleases. I think that would be the best solution. That's my personal opinion. I say this as somebody who has acquired a somewhat unjustified reputation for being a defender of Andrews. I've never been a defender of Andrews, really. I have said where I thought he had made mistakes, that he had made them, and I've always said that I thought that his behaviour was not exactly creditable. But I will now come to a point which, to me and to other people who are as minded as I am about the Andrew business. Either Andrew is the biggest hypocrite and the best liar that God has put on this earth recently, or then, because, let me put it this way, I have always said that I have been led to believe that Andrew's tastes do not run in certain directions, and therefore that many of the things that he has been accused of in terms of impropriety were not credible. Now, either he has misled people all his life who know him very well, and he had a secret life that nobody knew about, which incidentally has not actually emerged photographically from the Epstein files. Or then he might well be innocent of some of the more gross things of which he has been accused, while being very guilty of very poor judgment and basically of lying and deceiving people. Now, in terms of the accusations against him, certainly he lied in that interview on the BBC. I can understand why somebody would lie in circumstances like that. I'm not excusing it, but I can understand it. But all of this leads one to conclude that if Andrew has any love for the institution of the monarchy and any regard for the legacy of his mother, he will go into exile sooner rather than later. It is the only solution that will actually cause an abatement of what is ghoulish interest that is partly justified and partly politicized in the grossest way possible. Let me move on to what other people say. Jeanette says, "Hi, Lady C. More of today's content, please. I very much enjoy listening to you talking about such topics." That's yesterday's topic. Teresa Baker says, "Yes, please, Lady C." These are some of many comments. "Educate us about the political changes happening behind our backs." And Lynn Pistilli says, "I would love for you to go into greater depth about Epstein." Well, yes. Epstein, and this is something people do not seem to understand at the moment, because the mainstream media on both sides of the Atlantic are scrambling this sequence of events. And in doing so, they are furthering a false narrative. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again because it is very important. The sweetheart deal that Epstein struck with the Florida authorities was what allowed him to not even get a proper prison sentence, because he was out on a daily basis. But he did get a prison sentence, a light prison sentence, where the grosser aspects of his crime were actually swept under the carpet. And people reasonably took the view that if he had only been charged with what turned out, according to him, to have been a terrible misunderstanding, and that he hadn't really been guilty of the crimes that they had suspected him of being guilty of, because he hadn't known that those girls were underage, nor had he actually realized that they were, shall we say, ordinary girls. He thought they were all on the game. That's what the ordinary meaning of the charge and what he pled guilty to means. And that meant that when he came out of prison, when he was released, he was able to say validly, it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, I like younger women, but I don't like, and I was never guilty of, interfering with underage girls. It was a terrible misunderstanding, and I have paid the price for it. People quite reasonably accepted that fact as a fact, because the state had accepted it as a fact. Let's remember that. Some of his continuing associations after he was released were with very grand, high-profile people. Bill Gates met him after he was released from prison, not before. Bill Gates had an ongoing relationship with him after he was released from prison. He had a close working relationship with the Baroness de Rothschild, Ariane de Rothschild, and he was helping her in her fight against her mother-in-law, Nadine, Baroness Edmond de Rothschild, and in the problems she was having with her husband, Benjamin's cousin, David de Rothschild. He was also friendly with Lady de Rothschild over here, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild's then wife. I mean, there are now trying to be links made that because Epstein was Jewish and the Rothschilds are Jewish, although it has to be said, Ariane de Rothschild is not Jewish. She married Baron Benjamin de Rothschild, but she's not Jewish. But there is the whole link to the Rothschilds, the Rothschilds, the state of Israel, and people don't seem to be accepting, because the mainstream media is going with the narrative that once he was released from prison, he should have been treated as a pariah. And the fact that he wasn't treated as a pariah meant that people were condoning his complicity and illegality with underage girls. But that's not true. I mean, just look at the facts. Epstein was brilliant. He was dreadful, but he was brilliant. And Epstein also, could I understand, be very personable. I've never met Epstein. I made sure I avoided him. After what he did to my friend, if he walked into a room, I made sure I positioned myself so I could walk out of it without ever being introduced to him. But I know from many people who knew him that he was extremely charming and bright. Epstein was a lower middle class Jewish boy from one of the boroughs, and not Manhattan, of New York, who ended up mixing at the highest level with a great many people. And people valued his opinions because he was expert at bringing people together and facilitating deals for people and protecting people's interests. This is being lost in the melee, and it shouldn't really be lost in the melee, because yes, he was a sleazebag. Certainly where physical matters of a certain carnal sort are concerned, this being YouTube, one has to be careful how one puts things. He should have been avoided like the plague. But I have said it time and again, many of the people with whom he mixed did not appreciate the full extent of his depravity. Did Andrew, is the question. Because what I have always been told about Andrew and what is being presented as evidence against Andrew are two radically different people. Did he have a secret life that nobody who knew him well knew about? Or was he the typical bore and bore, B-O-R-E and B-O-O-R, who was willing to let people think he was Jack the Lad, when in fact he was something entirely less interesting? Insofar as I'm concerned, the jury's out on that, because nothing that I have seen in terms of the Epstein papers actually convinces me to the contrary of what I was told, although it introduces sufficient room for doubt for one to be sensible about incorporating new information. But the fact of the matter is that whether Andrew is innocent or guilty as sin, he needs to step aside. He is guilty of poor judgment. And maybe it's unfair because there are many other people who were busy associating with Epstein long after he left prison. Crown Princess Mette-Marit of Norway, she's getting flack there because she had a continuing relationship with him. Baroness Benjamin de Rothschild, she's getting flack because she had a continuing relationship with him. Totally financial. Peter Mandelson, he's lost his position. He's being investigated by the authorities because in Britain, and he had a continuing relationship with him. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. Even I, who was a member of a circle where Jeffrey Epstein was a hate figure, did not know about the degree of decadence that has emerged. And also what is really interesting is if you look at the federal indictment of 2019 against Jeffrey Epstein that was filed in New York, it specifically covers the years 2002 to 2005. It does not cover the years thereafter. It certainly doesn't cover the years once he was released from prison. I hope that adds some light and balance to the subject. I'm not trying to excuse Epstein, nor am I trying to excuse anybody else. I'm just trying to put things in context. It doesn't kill in life to be fair and measured. Elaine Proctor says, Lady C, the rich get away with murder all the time. Noblesse oblige has been forgotten, and people are howling for some sanity and fairness. Elaine Proctor, I can well see why you would take that view, especially at the moment. But I want you to bear in mind that Jeffrey Epstein may have been rich, and he may have been mixing with very grand people, but he started out poor. He was, to a large extent, self-made, and to the rest of the extent, he was made by Lex Wexner, who was self-made, Victoria's Secret, etc. The rich get away with murder all the time? I've got news for you. In the United Kingdom, if you're rich, if you're the old established order, if you're titled, if you're royal, if you're gentry or grand, and you come before the law, you are treated as if you are a natural conservative. Conservative with a small and a large C. And we all know what happened to Lucy Connolly. And we all know what happens to people who are what Keir Starmer calls right-wingers in this country. You get a far harsher punishment than if you are regarded as one of the deprived or one of the entitled to consideration by the present government. And it has to be said by the compassionate members of the judiciary and the legal profession. There is a strong sense in this country that the rich should be, as Dennis Healy said, let's make the pips squeak. In America, it may be slightly different, but in this country, being rich is not an advantage when you are up against the law. And certainly not when you're grand, especially if you're grand and not rich, then you're really going to get it. But I agree with you, noblesse oblige has, to a large extent, been forgotten culturally, but it's not been forgotten at local level. I mean, this government would like to break up the communities where it still flourishes, because this government would like to make sure that no farm will ever be inherited on a working basis by the next generation, because they have introduced inheritance tax on working farms, which will make it impossible for working farms to continue to work at the size that they are at the moment. This, it has been suspected, is Keir Starmer's and the radical element of the Labour parties collusion with Bill Gates. Remember Bill Gates? The one who became a great friend of Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein had been released from prison. Honorary knight. Why isn't anybody calling from him to be stripped of his knighthood? Oh dear, how does that one work? Susan Dimmock says, you are absolutely right about the push for a socialist republic. I have watched this for the last couple of years and have come to the conclusion that Marxism never disappeared, it just wears a shiny globalist coat now. It's the reason people march on the streets without questioning what they are doing. Why students scream abuse at people who have different views and refuse them a university platform. I think I can name the first president of the projected republic, yet another politician who has lined his pockets from putting himself first instead of the country. It should be remembered that a lot of the instigators of the 1789 revolution died on the guillotine. Yes, so did an awful lot of the revolutionaries who introduced Leninist Marxism into Russia. And those who didn't die at the hands of the state in the Soviet Union, like Trotsky, managed to die abroad. The assassin's hand reached them. Let me see where I was. Lenin was replaced by Stalin. Once the juggernaut starts traveling, it will be well nigh impossible to stop, let alone turn around. This is why I am so eager to try to get people to see that they shouldn't allow themselves to be used, and that they should be careful what they are hoping to bring down or careless about bringing down. while they are enjoying righteous indignation. Most revolutions devour their own initially. There is no doubt that New Labour is in big trouble. Blue Labour, which is what it describes itself as Labour's radical tradition, has had this to say about the latest revelations in terms of Peter Mandelson with Jeffrey Epstein, which of course have been capitalized upon by Keir Starmer in the hope of preserving himself and throwing Peter Mandelson under the bus. This is what they say. This week exposed the moral and intellectual rot at the heart of our party. Glib arrogance, vicious court gossip, and a culture of conformity, a willingness to look the other way for factional reasons, blind to how it looks to the outside world, and for what? In the careerist scramble for a brief moment in the limelight, all imagination and curiosity are crushed, and so we are left empty of ideas and empty of soul. How far we have fallen as a party. This must be the end of a New Labour. Do you see what they're arguing for? Labour to be far more radical, to be no longer interested in prosperity, but to become even more radicalized and socialist, and to reinstate many of the socialist policies that were dismantled by Mrs. Thatcher and subsequent governments, which understood that you cannot have prosperity without productivity, and nobody is prepared to produce at an extortionate level unless they are personally going to benefit as well. Nobody is doing it for the greater good or for the state, and certainly not for the party. Oh yes, people will dedicate their time to the party for power and the acquisition of power, because they know they don't need to create wealth, because when they're in power, they will have the benefit of the products of wealth that were created by previous generations. For instance, Stalin and all of the communist apparatchiks lived in the palaces of the imperial family and the aristocracy. They didn't live in the hovels that everybody else lived in. Absolutely not. In fact, in Russia, under communism, there was a lane on the road that was reserved purely for the party. So people didn't have people who had cars, and very few people had cars, so there wasn't much traffic. But whenever there was traffic, the ordinary people suffered. The party commissars never suffered. They had their own lanes. Do you see a two-tier system? Far more obvious and pronounced than anything we have ever been able to come up with in the West. That's what they're aiming for. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of interest to you. Please let me know what ground you would like me to be covering with you. Okay? Thank you. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and if you can, please hype. Bye-bye.